Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at Charcha. First of all, big thank you to our platform host, the Nudge Foundation, for their incredible optimism and tireless work, without whom none of us will be here today. I would also like to thank all of our speakers for your participation on very, very short notice, and super excited for our gender track to kick off. Given this is actually our first session to kick off the gender track, as people are slowly trickling in or quickly trickling in, I will just take a moment to introduce Dalberg as the track host, as well as frame the upcoming discussions for this track. My name is Da Young. I'm an associate partner based in Dalberg, Mumbai, and I lead our education to employment practice, as well as a lot of our work in the gender space. I will be your MC for today. And tomorrow you will have another one of my colleagues, Sweta, who co-leads a lot of our gender work. So Dalberg is a strategic advisory firm focused on creating social impact. And we have a global footprint across over 20 countries. And in India, we are based in Mumbai and Delhi. We have a 100-person strong presence. And gender is not only a practice area here at Dalberg, but an important lens we apply across all of our work as a standard, regardless of sector, whether it's in energy, education, or financial inclusion, for example. And we do this proactively as well as intentionally by drawing out the gender dimensions of any given problem or opportunity. And we develop solutions that take into account the realities and needs of people of all gendered identities. And we really got excited for this opportunity to host this track because we recognized that COVID has been presenting a huge threat to set back a ton of progress we've made as society to improving the lives of women and girls. But we also saw there is a glimmer of hope and an opportunity perhaps to reset some norms and rebuild for a stronger and more gender equal world. So we have organized this track really to explore the various dimensions and ways in which the lives of women and girls are threatened by COVID and exchange ideas on how to come out of this crisis while building for greater resilience going forward. Now, history has told us that unless we take urgent action now, COVID could have disastrous and really long-lasting impact on the lives of women and girls. For example, the Ebola crisis in West Africa has shown that it took women much longer to return to pre-Ebola income levels than men, and a lot more girls permanently dropped out of schools than boys at the end of the epidemic. And so we've structured this conversation into 6 discussions as well as 2 keynote addresses covering a wide variety of topics. We'll start the session very shortly by exploring how to take a gender lens to policy response. Then we'll move on to preventing gender-based violence amidst COVID and investing in girls as well as in their education. Tomorrow, we're going to pick up this conversation by opening on how to empower women in the workplace in this environment, protecting children from abuse, and finally, engaging men and boys in this important conversation. And we're really thankful also to the Nudge Foundation, who has curated 2 incredibly inspiring Josh Talks, which we will share shortly. So without taking much more of your time, I would now like to introduce you to our moderator for the very first session, Sara Jacob. Many of you may know her from We the People. Sara is a renowned journalist and anchor at NDTV. She covers current events and social issues, and we're really delighted to have her kick off the dialogue on redrawing priorities. How can policymakers better respond to meet the needs of women? For really a country of this scale, to make any big change, we need to move policy. And we are thrilled today to have 2 very esteemed speakers with deep experience in shaping policy. Trisha Shetty is an Indian social activist and lawyer. She started She Says, a nonprofit organization working for gender equality through youth and civic society engagement. she says successfully lobbied the Indian government to make sanitary napkins tax-free. We also have Nishtha Satyam, who is the youngest woman to represent UN Women among 193 countries. She is an unapologetic feminist who works at the intersection of policy, politics, and people. She's also a trained economist and a policy expert with a focus on applied macroeconomics and fiscal policy. She's a fierce advocate of mainstreaming women across the marketplace, the workplace, and the community. So really excited for this discussion, and handing it over to you without further ado, Sara.
Under these trying circumstances. Hello to everyone who's joining us online. Let's begin quickly. You know, governments are facing a huge challenge in managing the crisis caused by COVID-19, by this pandemic, and there are different groups that are in urgent need of support, not in the least the elderly, who we know are the most vulnerable or most likely to succumb to the virus because of the preconditions, medical preconditions. But as governments look to constructing their policy responses, why is it crucial, or is it crucial that they do not ignore the impact that this crisis can, is, and will have on women? That's what we're here to discuss. So first, to set up the discussion, Nishtha and Trisha, let me first just establish that we do have a crisis at hand, which, if so, then it would make it imperative that when formulating policy, governments and their responses really to this crisis, it's crucial that governments do not ignore the impact that this crisis will have on women. So Nishtha, let me start with you. Would it be fair to say, can I make a blanket statement really by saying that this pandemic amplifies the disadvantages that women already face every day in our lives before COVID? And are women more exposed to the anticipated fallout of this pandemic?
Sorry, I was on mute. I didn't realize. Well, thanks, Sara. Thanks for asking me that question. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really glad that we're talking about gender. This is one of those situations where I think it's absolutely okay. In fact, it is a blanket statement that we should be making, and that statement applies to all forms of marginalization. Of course, the largest constituencies of marginalized people is women, who remain at the fringe of the economy, who remain at the fringe in policy making. And absolutely, there is no doubt, even as a result of studying pandemics before this, there's no doubt that a situation like this multiplies, compounds the struggles that women face and pushes them even to the margin. And in all ways, socioeconomically, in terms of access to jobs, in terms of access to health, in terms of access to well-being in general. So yes, to answer your question, it does push them further back from where they were. In fact, it reverses, and it stands the chance to reverse a large number of gains that we thought we had made in terms of gender equality. Yeah. So for those two reasons, I think it's very important to intentionalize and to articulate very clearly in our response to COVID the need for women to be at the center of policy making. One, because it impacts them more. Two, because they are greater change agents that ensure that the change that we will see or are hoping to make is more sustainable and is irreversible.
Well, I don't want to, at the risk of, not dumbing this down, but there are many people who may be joining in on this conversation let's just try and give them the basics. Like, I'm just trying to understand, first and foremost, simply, what does this mean for women both under lockdown and in a post-lockdown, post-COVID life, right? Because first and foremost, just look at the simple things like work, because many women are primary caregivers, and with schools closed, for example, women are already finding it hard to work. Can you just give us some examples for the rest of the audience who may not have the kind of exposure that you have in the work that you do in creating policy and seeing the impact of policy on the ground? Either you or Trisha, how does this really affect women more than men?
It affects women much more than men because women are at the margins of the economy. But what does that exactly mean, right? I mean, let's, for example, take healthcare, right? So we all know that 70% of the global workforce of healthcare professionals are women. So they're exponentially more exposed to the virus than men are. Two, women for a very long time have been economic migrants, which means that there are a large number of women who don't get the security that men get at their workplaces, either in terms of contracts, modalities, or even the nature of work. We know that historically women have been paid much lesser than men. I mean, the global pay gap exists anywhere between 16 to 70%, the average being about 35% for men and women, for women. And a situation like this threatens them in all ways, in more ways than one. Of course, that's the aspect where they're health workers, where they're participants in the economy. But if you just look inwards, a little more inside home, I mean, the fact that even as per the 2001 census of India, about 71% of India lived in about less than 2 rooms, right? So in a cramped up, confined space like that, the kind of space that women get in terms of nutrition, in terms of healthcare, in terms of just space, and the backlash that we're seeing through domestic violence are all aspects that very, very negatively impact women, pushing them thereby into the life cycle of poverty. I'm just going to add one example there, right? And this is true even for good times. A girl goes to school, she doesn't have proper access to sanitation, hygiene, falls out of school. When she's out of school, there's greater work at home. There's an undue burden of unpaid care work on her. If she's staying at home, there's early marriage, and early marriage is early pregnancy. Early pregnancy is bad health. Bad health is a rude economic shock. And it just goes on and on. So what this situation threatens to do is to push back women into a life cycle of poverty, which then requires a huge development effort to get them out of it. So we do have the chance of reversing everything we have gained.
Trisha, this crisis threatens to undo gains women have made in recent years, because especially when it comes to the workforce, because for me, the first sign or the first impact really has been it's harder to work, both under the lockdown and in a post-lockdown world.
You know, so apart from the work that I do in India, I also work extensively on good governance issues under the Paris Peace Forum. And the one thing that we're coming to realize is it's not an over-reliance on multilateralism. If anything, it's been an over-reliance on individual institutions that has led us to this situation of crisis. If one thing we should realize is it's been an over-reliance on NGOs, on CSOs that shows us the complete lapses within the system. You talk about the workforce, okay? I'll give you specific examples. Madhya Pradesh government is putting forward certain policies where they're considering factories not having safety and health norms that they had before. They are pushing for exemption on cleanliness, urinals, creches, lighting, water. They're also asking that factory managers do not need to send notices to the government anymore in case of worker contracts and occupational disease. Now, when you highlight this, very much as Nishtha said, you talk about sanitation, you talk about creches. I mean, what population does that affect more than anyone else? Of course, it's women. Of course, it's gender non-conforming people. So by effect, you're putting forward policies by a government that's pretty much giving workplaces carte blanche status to exclude women, to discriminate women, and make the workplace hostile. Now, even if it's talking about going to work, right, we need to talk about mobility. We have to address 3 factors here. 1, a woman's home, then the mobility to get her to workplace, and then the workplace. So I set the context as to how a workplace is now going to become hostile. The homes, which I'll come to in a bit about domestic violence, are anyways hostile. We don't address the amount of domestic violence and hostility women face within sanitized environments of their home. And then you talk about mobility to get women from one place to the other place. If anything, COVID is now going to put further restrictions on mobility. What are the kind of measures we have heard with regards to safe transport, with regards to timely transport? They're talking about extending work times to 12 hours. okay, how is a woman supposed to ensure she gets from one place to the other place? Even if she does agree to do those 12 hours of work, we don't hear about these things. We only hear about the economy must thrive, economy must thrive. Okay, sure, let the economy thrive. Even if we just talk about the GDP, the World Bank says women invest up to 90% of their salary back into their families and their communities. Men, it's at best 30%. Okay, this is global statistics. The World Bank also further breaks down where do they invest this money. Primarily, women invest the money in food, healthcare, home improvement, and schooling. Now, these are things that we for sure know we need to invest further resources on, especially with pandemics like this that are going to keep hitting us, right? We have statistics that say we're going to have possibly 4 lockdowns globally over the next 2 years. Now, when you know encouraging women's economic participation, making sure women stay in, young girls stay in school is going to be effective in pushing a country's GDP, but you don't hear about these things because these things don't make for sexy talk. They don't want to get into the details, right? Yesterday, everyone was talking about the devil lies in the details, but the problem is the people designing these details don't look like you and me. They are men who don't account for these nuances. And the third aspect I'll talk about is domestic violence. Of course, we've had our Ministry of Women and Child Development acknowledge that there's been a surcharge in domestic violence cases. What have they done, Sarah? They've put forward a women's helpline number. Okay, let's run through this scenario, right? I call up the helpline number. I tell them my home is a hostile environment. What happens? The person will come. Where will he rescue me and take me? Where are the shelter homes? Yeah. Show me one shelter home a woman can safely be taken to. Like, it's the unfortunate reality is I had this call with other CSOs, civil society organizations, and we were basically talking about, look, the best thing we can do is ensure that a police person will call up the alleged abuser and threaten him and say, if you don't stop, I'm going to arrest you. Jails are overcrowded. They're not taking any more people in jail. Courts are not hearing any cases unless it's an emergency case. So the best thing, ideally, what we can hope for is, in terms of crisis prevention that we do, is we can reach out to a police person within the jurisdiction of where the abuse is happening. The police person will call up the alleged perpetrator and let him know that, listen, there's a case against you, be vigilant. The best thing we can hope for is the girl will file an NC at the police station and request that there's a daily checkup being done at her doorstep. Where are the shelter homes? You talk about child sexual abuse. Do you know that in India, children in conflict with the law are kept in the same place as children in need of care and protection? So basically, juveniles who commit crimes are kept in the same shelter home as juveniles who are rescued from child rape or child abuse happening within their homes. What mother will want to see her child firstly report abuse that's happening within their homes, and then secondly realize that the child is taken away and kept in a shelter home? Worst part with this COVID crisis, which I have experienced because I was working on a child rape case, is shelter homes are not taking any more inmates. And I'm using the word inmates because children are being treated as criminals, because they're saying we don't want an outbreak happening inside our homes. So they're sending people back. So if anything, this is a complete deficiency within the system. And, you know, it's difficult, I understand. I'll quickly summate with saying what France did. France has a really high rate of domestic violence, of IPV, intimate partner violence. And what they have done is they don't have a cookie cutter solution. But one thing that has helped is them telling people that if you're being subject to domestic violence, you are allowed to go out and exit from that space and go stay at a friend's. They have come up with unique alternate shelter homes that people can have access to, which has seen women feel safer and feel like they have a sort of rescue button that they can touch and be mentally stronger. And I think it's prudent to highlight that domestic violence or caregivers addressing domestic violence have not been highlighted as essential service providers during COVID.
Yeah. So what you're pointing out here is that in France, the government has basically acknowledged, at least, that women bear the brunt of the unintended impact of the state policy, just as we've had here in India, the decision to open up liquor stores. Was it even factored in that there are already rising cases of domestic violence, and what will this mean for families going forward as well? Under a lockdown, you are opening up liquor stores. So, Nishtha, then let me ask you, is this also because, or is this an outcome of the fact that we don't have that many women in roles of leadership? I think you're muted.
Sorry. Well, I think, I mean, there are two sides to the theory, right? One, is it because, I mean, are we not thinking of women because we don't have enough women in decision making? Well, yeah, I think to a large extent that's true, because where you see women in power dealing with the crisis, you do see women bringing into perspective the variance of life itself, right? To not be thinking of anybody's life in silos. So I do think that that one big part of this is having women in decision-making positions and reflect and kind of bring the diversity on thinking in policy making. However, the reverse, which essentially may or may not be true, it doesn't guarantee us that should there be more women in decision making, women will be prioritized, because we've also not seen that happen in some of the spaces. But that's no reason to keep women out of decision making. I think a very, very big point here, and I think something that's extremely noteworthy in how countries have responded, is the fact that the 6 countries that have done extremely well in coping with the pandemic, responding to it, are led by women. So yes, I think diversity in thinking, in decision making, has to reflect, and that's definitely
just as we see
of the
in
Constitution.
states where big decisions have been taken on abortion, the legislature has comprised basically of men. So is that okay, is really the question we're asking. But Trisha, your organization, and you touched upon this a little bit, works with issues of sanitation, right? And looking at sanitation through a gender sensitive lens. And I've been seeing actually reports in the press about how even ration is patriarchal now, right? Because periods don't stop during a lockdown, but there are so many reports of young women in rural areas of the country who are not being able to access sanitary pads right now under this lockdown.
So, look, in India, we have only 12% of women that have access to sanitary products. When we did an audit, we looked at the current system, and we put forward several RTIs, Right to Information Act, and it was daunting because there are many villages that don't even have any sort of menstrual hygiene products being sold in the first place. So, on one side, I hear this section of society talk about we need to move towards biodegradable sanitary napkins. We need to move towards, cups. We need to stay away from environmentally harmful products. But the truth is, where are these biodegradable cups being sold? Mostly online. In India, only 27% of women have access to the internet. Right. And this is something Nishtha was talking about yesterday when we had our briefing call. So it's like highlighting a problem without providing guaranteed access to solutions. Right. And even if you talk about basic sanitary napkins or pads, they come and they'll give it to you. It's not something that comes like every Diwali or every birthday that I can come drop off a hamper package to you and be like, see you later. I hope this gets you through, the year. It's our biological function that, you need every approximately 3 odd weeks, right? So it's a sustained cost. That means if the government is providing that, you need to make sure it's a sustained product being provided to women. Even in schools and colleges, the government is quick to say, we have installed sanitary napkins. Where are the incinerators to dispose these sanitary napkins? Do you know how these sanitary napkins are actually given at low cost? They issue tenders. And ask private companies to bid for it. There is zero transparency when it comes to how these tenders are issued, how these tenders are distributed. If you actually look down at the breakdown of numbers of how much money, how many crores are actually going per state, it's an abysmal amount. And this is all before COVID. It's, and you see these ration cards being given out. You're right. Where do you see sanitary napkins? I've been part of, Maharashtra relief work. It's been customized. So someone will get up and say, okay, this woman needs access to milk powder. I've heard a lot of conversations happening about milk powder, women needing to breastfeed their children. But trust me, till date, I've not heard one entity on ground come forth and say, we need sanitary napkins. That's the need. Because people are even feeling shy to ask about it. It's not that there is no need for it. It's people, it's CSOs, it's organizations being proactive and saying, okay, we need to kind of distribute these BMC, these sanitary napkins. There are conversations happening where the BMC is saying, yeah, we're willing to distribute sanitary napkins, but we don't know where to distribute the sanitary napkins. So, find a woman, find a household, forget find a woman, find a household. That's where you distribute sanitary napkins. If you're distributing dal, chawal, distribute sanitary napkins or biodegradable products. But it just goes to, again, show you that not only are we treating, if anything, I think it's come to light how little we value the poor in our country. And then as a subsect of that, it's how little we even give regard to women and their needs. So it's a complete hierarchy of oppression where we come at the bottommost of pillar of it. And the second you start working on ground, the only thing we can do is, we shouldn't, and I'll tell you this as someone who runs an NGO, I should not be so effective that I replace the need for the government intervention.
Correct.
My job is to not replace state or center apparatus. If anything, I should be lobbying for the center and state to double down. And this is where UN Women does such a good job of, pushing for those policy changes. Because as civil society, we should not be doing such a good job that we deem state and center to be incumbent or unnecessary. That's not a sustainable solution. How much can we fundraise? How much can we have our foots on the ground? There are people in civil society talk.
This to NGOs and can't and shouldn't be doing that either. But I want to again go back to the big policy level. As Trisha mentioned, Nishtha, she said that women tend to save more. There are many studies that have shown the contribution to GDP could be much more. So then why is this something that comes naturally to the governments the world over, right? I'm not just saying this is India. When on the ground, it is actually counterproductive to achieving a more rapid recovery of the economy if there is gender equality in policy making or even in understanding awareness of the needs of women when it comes to making policy, because it's ironic.
It is paradoxical. It is ironic, and I think it's a question that we should ask ourselves even in good times, leave alone in troubled times, which is, if gender equality is good for everybody, then what is the problem? How is it that the markets aren't working for it? How is it that policymakers don't understand it? Why is it still a matter of advocacy? Why does it still remain to be pushed? And I think one of the things that we must confront ourselves with is gender equality is about equality. And equality is not very comforting to anybody who owns power, who has the power, because it's about bringing everybody else to the same level. So the redistribution of power is actually a very, very uncomfortable process. I think it is easier to maintain the power dynamics of a household than challenge it in center stage women. Because the moment we do that, we see a backlash, right? I mean, even for example, a lot of us who work on economic autonomy do realize that the moment a woman gains economic autonomy, there is immediate backlash from the household itself. So yes, it is an uncomfortable process. Equality in itself is an uncomfortable process because it's easier to keep hierarchies and run them, and there is somebody who benefits out of running that hierarchy. So this benefits all, but why isn't it done? I think that's quite the one thing that I've always come up with is because the redistribution of power is difficult. But despite that, sorry, Sarah, just one more point. But despite that, I think what is important for us to acknowledge is it is now becoming unaffordable to not acknowledge and understand and apply the knowledge that investing in women is going to lead to lasting, faster returns. And if it is almost becoming unaffordable as an economy, as a country, with stated outcomes. And therefore, I'm hoping that this is a good chance, this is a good time in history to relook at how we make policies and who we make them for.
Yeah, before I get to this, so Trisha, would you agree that the redistribution of power makes one uncomfortable, which is why policies are made like this? Because it really is counterproductive. Because, for example, again, we've been reading about a growing concern that these standard out units are unisex, right? They're made in a unisex design, but it just doesn't fit women properly. And as Nishtha pointed out at the start, that I think more than 50%, maybe 70% even of workers on the front line in the healthcare industry comprise of women, and PPE units aren't made for their sizes and their form.
Let me just put it this way. I think it's very easy for people to say, I'm for gender equality. But the second you start talking about the inequality, the discrimination, the violence, the second you get into the nuances, the details, no one wants to hear it. It makes them uncomfortable. And when you double down and start talking about it, Sarah, I'm sure you as a journalist have heard this. the kind of names that you get called, right? If you talk about women-centric topics, the kind of pushback that you get. I'm sure Nishtha has got that in terms of know your place. So it's a whole problem that we have been dealing with, where we ask women to speak up and fight for their rights, but do so politely without upsetting the people who are oppressing you too much. So of course it's a problem of representation. Of course it is. And when I say representation, I mean representation in the highest of offices. Who are the people designing these policies? You look at our finance ministry. When the GST was passed, what was the the composition of that? There was one woman within the entire finance ministry. I mean, you saw what they passed off as VAT-free bangles, chudi, sindoor, and we had to fight. Yeah, we had to fight, launch the largest social media campaign to push for sanitary napkins to be tax-free. And we've asked for asks beyond that, because we recognize even removing the tax is not going to ensure women have guaranteed access to menstrual hygiene and sanitation. The point is, we don't want to have these uncomfortable conversations because they don't make for catchy headlines. We have the statistics. I mean, we can tell you statistics ad honem. You invest this amount, keep girls in school for longer, the GDP of the country will grow. If the last intent is to make sure the country progresses, it's not too hard. You want to address climate change? The two most cost-effective solutions to address climate crisis is investing in young girls' education and sexual and reproductive health care rights. How often have you ever heard of this investment actually happening? So I think this is why we have to be very intentional and laser focused with holding center state accountable. Where is the money going? Where is the representation? Because I think at this point, even pushing for representation may just lead to tokenism. So even if you go beyond that and just say, where is the money going? How is the policy being gender centric? You set up special committees if you have to, if you don't want to give these people permanent positions. But how do we, have fast responses to this without making sure women suffer more than they already are?
So you touched upon education. Girls' education, women's education. Now that I think is something we must need to touch upon, because this whole, you work with digital literacy, and this whole new COVID world is a whole new definition of the haves and have-nots, right? The haves really are the ones who have access to an internet account, and the have-nots are those who don't. And in that sphere, when it comes to technology, when it comes to digital access, women already disadvantaged, they're already marginalized. This is going to be a huge setback going forward. Access to technology, even for booking a train ticket. Now they've started trains for migrants. How are they supposed to do it? How are the women supposed to do it? You don't even have access to a phone.
I think with that, there's, I forget the study, but there was actually research done across India where they said that, the broadband things that you had, like the internet routers, were closer to the boys' room than the girls' room, if it was a family that had, boys and girls. So of course there's limited access to the internet. Then let's not forget that the platform in itself is hostile towards women in general. And I think the third element that we need to talk about is, okay, quality education that needs to be provided. We are not providing this sort of quality education, financial literacy. I think now, instead of just highlighting deficiencies, if we was to suggest solutions, maybe it's a good time now for the government to introduce financial literacy as part of their education program, right? To figure out, because since things will be online now, making sure if they're setting up these camps that have that have, say, mobile schools happening, ensuring that you're going door to door to get the girls out of their homes and make them sit and participate in these mobile camps. A lot of it is just, really rudimentary. We don't need high-tech interventions. The more I work on ground and the more familiar I am with, technology, I come to realize, truthfully, it's just making sure people have access to it. Very rudimentary on-ground work that needs to be done to ensure we at least come to a place of bare equality.
Okay, you mentioned solutions. So let me, Nishtha, start with you, and then Trisha, both of you can take this question. Let me play devil's advocate here, right? This COVID-19 pandemic, it's caused a huge havoc, but does it also, like most times when you see, this kind of a scenario with so much havoc and so much everything being turned on its head, it also offers unprecedented potential for change. Have there been any positives, according to you, when it comes to entrenched gender issues?
Well, honestly, I think the gender issue is a rather complex social issue. that has been a derivative of patriarchy for centuries together. So it probably would be being, I mean, I would probably be quite an optimist if I already predicted a change to something that has been so structural for many years. But at the root of that question, I think we have to recognize that gender inequality is because of structural barriers to inequality. And until and unless we intentionally address those structural barriers to inequality, we're not going to be solving the problem. What we might see today is few things improving symptomatically, right? But it isn't possible to see change to structural barriers. That said, at least it's not necessarily a positive thing, but the one thing that I definitely see is the fact that the world has been working from home and has been working still fine. Business continuity seems going okay. And this has been an ask from women for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Because, it would have
women especially
them to participate in the labor force much more than they had in the past. And today, I think it's a national realization by employers that across many sectors, working from home is not necessarily a productivity issue. It doesn't necessarily
possibly have been done earlier when there were women in their mid-career stages who were asking for a few hours of work from home, maybe on a Fridays, maybe, and everybody raised eyebrows.
Employers were highly skeptical, and today they don't have a choice, and they realize that it hasn't particularly impacted any of the parameters that they measure or matter to them in a big way. In fact, what it has done is it has brought infrastructure costs down with no particular changes to productivity. In some cases, even higher productivity than people turning up to work. So, but it will require it will require us to intentionally think and articulate this change and make it a part of our new normal. It's very easy for the world to come back just as it was, but I think we have to be conscious about crafting the new normal, picking what is working for us, and making that a forever change in the new
But
normal.
even with this new normal, there are, at a national level, you can see the government and state governments junking labor laws, for example, as Trisha touched upon, to take advantage of the pandemic to extend factory hours. Similarly, as companies now are moving to work from home, I'm hearing of companies that are saying that productivity, because you have the advantage of working from home, you have to work for longer hours. And what the governments and what our society doesn't realize as a whole is that there is a fallout to this. Not just does it mean that, these women are working now 12 hours and over and above that, doing the kind of housework that they are expected to do. Similarly, when it comes to factories, what does it mean to bring up a whole generation of young kids without fathers, without father figures? There's going to be a social fallout. We can't just look at the economic fallout. But Trisha, to go back to the question about are there any positives that you see?
So I would say it's been interesting to see how different classes of society have been responding to the crisis. So you can see the people who have access to social media, the middle class, the upper middle class, family structures kind of rediscovering what family structure could look like, right? So you are seeing an increased participation of different family members within the family, kind of unlearning behaviors, having these jhadu katka competitions. So you're seeing that happen. And I also think it's been interesting because social media has kind of glamorized and made it sexy for now people to, be equal participants at the workplace. So that for sure has been, a promising step. It's like us celebrating for like basic bare minimums. I saw, a meme that said, oh, finally men discovered motherhood, where they're talking about, juggling things and not having enough time. But it's also interesting in terms of the, the workforce, the frontline workers, the nurses, the police women who are, putting on the uniform and working like ungodly hours. And I think there is, the positive when you're driving down a road and you see, a group of police women sitting there serving, doing their duty at par with men. When you're seeing BMC workers who are women, because we were providing PPE equipment to them, so you could see BMC workers. When you see nurses, on the front lines doing so much of the work. I think we need to really hear, beyond the claps, which of course I'm guessing may be good for their morale, but we need to be deliberate in terms of acknowledging the work that the women here have done, serving as frontline warriors. Because I do believe the more we acknowledge them, and when I say deliberate, it's because their work doesn't just start and stop at the hospital or at the, after doing the karamchari work on the ground of sanitation work. They then, as we know, women have additional onus of domestic work. They then have to go back, take care of their family. There's also the isolation that they're forced to be subject to. So I think here, if we're deliberate in terms of recognizing the added burden that women have taken on by themselves, and are showing the kind of leadership that they have, and start acknowledging this leadership as a government, as society, by ourselves, if we start acknowledging these kind of grassroots leadership. Because this is why I think Nishtha and I'm speaking on Nishtha's behalf, forgive me, but kind of took a front at the question of how can we empower women. No, there's a lot of mobilization happening. We just need to put a spotlight and recognize it and be deliberate in saying this is leadership, and if you double down and invest more on this is how we can ensure we are more equipped to deal with further pandemics, which we know will hit us, with climate crisis, which we know will hit us. So I say those are the solutions I want to highlight, the work already being done by women, and kind of celebrating their leadership and pushing for more of that, and pushing for money. I'll always come back to this. Push for monetary investment and policies that will, effectively help women.
Well, I think maybe we should try and take some questions if there are any questions coming in. Meanwhile, I do want to add, I know it's just maybe a small minority, but it's the habit of mine being a TV journalist to try and end on a positive note. Something that's been very endearing for me is meeting at least two couples, young couples, married, no kids, who chose to, at the start of the lockdown, split up and go stay in their own homes, because they both believed that even the wife needed to look after her aging parents, and not that she would be with the husband. So I thought that was fantastic, and it shows that change, of course, is slow, and this may be just a microcosm of what's happening across the India. But even one couple or two couples that I know of, I think is great. Diane, do we have any questions or from the audience? How do we do this? Audience question. What are the best ways to bring women's issues in critical notice to the policymakers? What kind of means, apart from protests and petitions, have worked in the past, especially during a crisis? Trisha, do you want to start, and I'll just skim through these questions? We have quite a few. So
if you have let me just make it so simple. If you have a phone, get a Twitter account, go tweet at the Minister of Finance, go tweet at your minister, go tweet at your Home Minister, go tweet at your Chief Minister. Make loud noise. What is the best way to get leaders' attention? You make loud noise. Look, leadership is weak. They very hardly lead. They follow in the direction of what the mass opinion is. So here we have to push for our voices to be loud and amplified. So make a loud noise about it. Ask, where is the money going? Demand better from the Madhya Pradesh government. People have been criticizing them. So push back against the discrimination that we can already anticipate happening. Make loud noise about it and demand for better. Use your social media to amplify these messages. Sitting at home, take 5 minutes out, understand how these policies are going to negatively affect women. Have this conversation with the women in your household. I think so often we forget to have, a lot of these conversations that we're talking about, it's coming from this experience, comes from having honest conversations with women around me. I am all of 30. I've worked on ground for all of 5 to 6 years. But if I can affirmatively say these things need to be pushed up to the highest offices, it's not because I'm the smartest person in the room. I'm just having conversations and I have my ear to the ground. So that's what everyone can do, and make loud noise about it.
Make a noise. All right. That was Surbhi Yadav who asked that question. Mahesh Dodi Srinivas asked, so how has COVID-19 changed gender equations? What has changed suddenly? Nishtha, she asks, how do you think remote working or the work from home model will work with a semi-urban or rural women? Well,
say that again. Sorry, I can't see the question on the screen.
How do you think remote working or the work from home model will work with semi-urban or rural women?
Well, honestly, let me answer the first part of the question, which is how has COVID changed gender equations? Well, I don't think it has changed gender equations, and I don't think even that the change is sudden. What it has done is it has amplified the gap between men and women, their access, their voice, their choice and agency. So it didn't happen overnight. I think it has just brought to fore the issues that were under the carpet, some of them, and some of the issues that we were talking about have now just become mass issues, which were really a fringe conversation before this. How do we think the work from home model will work for semi-urban or rural audiences? I think honestly, it is not so much a matter of the kind or part of the society that you're talking about. I think these could be sectoral conversations. We have to be talking about how these models work for manufacturing. How will this model work for anything else? But you'd be surprised that a large part of rural India constitutes of home-based workers. But a lot of work is done from the space of a home. Women are paid, for example, particularly if I have to just take the example of the textile industry. Women do take back work to their homes, complete working on that piece, and are either paid by the number of pieces they churn. So that is a work from home model. In fact, there's a lot for urban India to learn from the others. So I think it would work fine, and it has been a long call for women across sectors, and a big ask always that has been put on the table in front of governments, in front of employers, as one thing that will change women's lives and help them to participate more in the labor force. So I'm assuming that the natural realization that it is not a productivity barrier will seep in and will take the face of an actual model. And I'm hoping to see some of that.
Okay, Dan, do we have any more questions? Otherwise, Trisha and Nishtha, just to close up, okay, how do we ensure that there are more women in leadership positions? What are the panelists' view on the idea of reservation for women? Okay, let's quickly take that, and then I'm going to close out.
Well, I'll go first on that, if it's okay with Trisha.
Of course.
Sure.
Okay. So I am I'm a big advocate of reservations, you see, because merit is a conversation that you have between equals. And I don't think the starting point for men and women is the same. So meritocracy is not a conversation, is not a parameter that you talk about when you're not talking about two equal constituencies. So I am a big advocate of reservation. How has reservation for women helped us? I think India has the greatest example of getting women in grassroots politics through the 73rd and 74th Amendment. And it is actually a world-class example where India is home to more women in grassroots politics than anywhere else in the world. And today, the entire system of local governance, which is how 80% of India plans and spends and consumes, is influenced by women and their perspectives. And to me, that's one example where a reservation over a period of time has actually changed has expanded choices and spaces for women to express their voices. And I think that's a huge change in a country in the way it governs itself. So based on that, I do think that a reservation could be a good tool to look at more women in leadership positions until and unless we don't solve structural barriers to inequality.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, Trisha, you wanted to add something?
No, just to echo what Nishtha said. I mean, even if you look at Rwanda and, how they have, come forward, they have enforced reservation. So reservation has been empirically proven to be effective because there's again data that says when women are holding positions like ministerial positions, they push for policies that don't just address women-centric issues, but address climate, address school, address education, address infrastructure. So there is data that says when women are involved in decision-making processes, they push for solutions, policies that are effective in community building, national building, and also encourage more partnerships. So we have that data. We also know the laziness where we've not seen representation. So if we have to get to the point of equal representation, the only way to do that is through reservation.
Okay, what are some ways transgender population is affected? We just have 4 minutes. So Nishtha, if you want to take this, or Trisha, more often than not, transgender persons do not have access to sustainable livelihoods or support from their families, often also part of abusive households. How do we bring the issues into the mainstream narrative?
I guess I just have two quick comments, if that's okay with Nishtha, and then I'll give it over to her. So one main thing is paperwork, right? The big thing that women, that especially the transgender community, they don't have access to is paperwork. So now if you're talking about booking trains, if you're talking about going online, a lot of stuff will be dependent on the requisite paperwork. So that is a huge issue that we need to address. Second thing, of course, when it comes to workplaces being hostile, you not having the right urinals, you're not having, the right compartmentalization, different spaces, right to privacy will be an issue. And the third thing, again, violence. So the amount of violence that you see, I think a big part of unaddressed violence that the transgender community faces is through the police. There's a lot of sexual violence that the police engage in on the transgender community that goes unaddressed. So again, who's going to watch the watchman? So again, and this is not issues that COVID is sort of, it is not issues that are coming to light because of COVID, it's just being magnified. So it's things, again, we need to make a loud noise about and push for representation. Even they don't have enough representation when it comes to holding leadership position. I would say bar none. So, where is the representation when it comes to transgender community or the LGBTQI community as a whole?
All right, we're out of time, but Nishtha, if you want to just give your closing words.
Well, my only closing words are that I'm glad that we had this conversation. I'm glad that we're talking about gender issues, and I hope that each one of us have a sphere of influence. Sara, you as a journalist, me as someone who works for the UN, and Trisha, and each one of us have a sphere of influence. And I think it's very, very important to exercise that voice in our sphere of influence and make this a talking point in our circles, whether it's with policymakers or not, but make this a talking point. And it's very important. I'm glad the question on transgenders was asked, because we need to think about those who are already marginalized at the margins of the society, including disabled, including sex workers. I mean, it's a conversation that I haven't had with anybody despite working for the issue. Again, there are some occupations that are not no contact occupations, right, which are severely under stress, and we must look at representation from these constituencies and also talk about them and make them center stage them to our circles of influence and our conversations and our talking points.
Thank you, Trisha. Thank you, Nishtha. Thank you, Dalberg. I think we're all in agreement. Thank you for bringing up this issue, this topic. It's hugely important. Let's remember that many industries that have been affected and that are going to be affected in the long term are female-dominated industries, airlines, tourism, retail, garment manufacturing industry. So we're going to see the fallout of COVID on women for years, I would say. So thank you for bringing this up and giving us this platform to talk about it, because a lot of the headlines aren't about this issue. There's so much happening when it comes to COVID-19, the pandemic, the economy, that this somehow slips through the cracks. So we're glad that we could give it some of the prominence and importance that it really requires. Thank you both. Thanks, Nishtha. Thanks, Trisha, and thanks, Dalberg.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nishtha, again, and Trisha for bringing light to many of really important issues that I hope we'll have more time to unpack over the next few sessions. And thanks so much, Sara, for your excellent moderation.
Thank you. See you.
Just wanted to note, bye-bye.